On September 18, 2015, the global automotive industry failed to merely stumble. It crashed into a concrete wall at 100 miles an hour. In a single afternoon, one of the most trusted, celebrated, and profitable brands on the planet evaporated 35% of its value. That is nearly 25 billion euros wiped off the ledger in a matter of hours. But the money was the least of their problems. This was not just a bad quarter. This was not a failed product launch or a marketing gaffe. This was a conspiracy. A conspiracy that involved top-level executives, sophisticated software engineering, and a deliberate, decade-long plot to poison the air we breathe while smiling and telling us it was clean. The company, of course, was Volkswagen, the people's car, the symbol of German engineering excellence, reliability, and precision.
For years, they had been selling a dream called clean diesel.
They told the globe they had solved the impossible equation: high performance, great fuel economy, and zero pollution. They ran Super Bowl ads. They won Green Car of the Year awards. They convinced millions of Americans to abandon hybrids for their turbocharged engines. But it was all a lie. To understand how a corporation with 80 years of history and 600,000 employees committed one of the largest frauds ever, we must look beyond the code. We must examine a culture of fear and an impossible deadline. A CEO who demanded the earth. This is the story of how the Wolfsburg giant fooled the entire planet and why they almost got away with it. To really grasp the scale of this deception, we need to go back to 2007. This was the year everything changed for the German manufacturer. At the time, the firm was a giant in Europe and South America. But in the United States, the most profitable auto market in existence, they were struggling. They were a niche brand. Americans bought Toyotas, Hondas, and Fords. The German make was seen as quirky, expensive to fix, and frankly, a bit small. Enter Martin Winterkorn. Winterkorn took over as CEO with a single maniacal obsession: make his company the #1 automaker on the globe. He refused to settle for being big. He wanted to crush Toyota and General Motors. He launched something called Strategy 2018. The plan was simple but brutal. Triple US sales in 10 years and reach 10 million vehicles sold globally per year. Now, Winterkorn was not your typical CEO. He was an engineer by trade, a micromanager known for carrying a gauge to measure the gaps between vehicle body panels to the millimeter. According to a profile in Der Spiegel, he was a man who ruled by fear. Subordinates were terrified of delivering bad news. If a part was incorrect, he would publicly berate the engineers. In the halls of their headquarters, there was a saying: North Korea without the labor camps. This culture is critical to understanding what happened next. Winterkorn demanded that the brand conquer America. But there was a problem, a massive engineering problem. To win in America, you need large vehicles, but big SUVs guzzle gas. And the US government had just tightened pollution standards, making them stricter than Europe's. So the manufacturer had a choice. They could go hybrid, like Toyota with the Prius, but they were years behind on battery technology. Or they could bet the farm on diesel. In Europe, this fuel was king. It was subsidized, cheap, and efficient. But compression ignition engines are dirty. They produce nitrogen oxide, or NOx. NOx is nasty stuff. It causes smog, acid rain, and severe respiratory issues. It kills people. The US limit for NOx was incredibly low, much lower than across the Atlantic. So, the technical team was given a directive: build a TDI engine that is powerful, fuel efficient, and meets the strictest exhaust limits in existence. Oh, and do it cheaply. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. The staff working on the new EA189 power plant realized something terrifying. It was impossible. You could have power and fuel economy, but you would spew contaminants. Or you could have low pollution, but the machine would drive like a lawnmower and guzzle fuel. There was a third option. You could use a chemical treatment system called AdBlue, which injects urea into the exhaust to clean it. But that system was expensive. It required a large tank that would eat into trunk space, and owners would have to refill it constantly. Winterkorn and the executives refused to hear about problems. They rejected expensive tanks. They wanted the perfect automobile. Put yourself in the shoes of those engineers. You have a boss who fires people for minor imperfections. You have a deadline that cannot move. And you have the laws of physics standing in your way. So what do? You cheat. Sometime around 2006 or 2007, a decision was made. If they failed to fix the engine, they would fix the test. Modern vehicles run on silicon. The engine control unit, or ECU, manages everything: fuel injection, air pressure, temperature. The coders realized they could write a few lines of script, a defeat device, that would know when the machine was being tested. Now, how does a sedan know it is taking a test? It is actually quite clever. When a unit is tested by the EPA, it is put on a dynamometer, basically a treadmill for autos. The wheels spin, but the chassis remains stationary. The steering wheel is not turned. The barometric pressure is constant. The code looked for exactly these conditions. If the software detected the vehicle was on a treadmill, it switched into dyno mode. In this mode, the engine ran at peak efficiency for cleanliness. It injected more chemicals. It sacrificed power. It ran perfectly clean. It was a model citizen. But the moment the sensors detected the steering wheel turn or the GPS move, indicating it was on a real road, the software switched to road mode. In this mode, the pollution controls were dialed back or turned off completely to improve performance and save fuel. The result? On the highway, these machines were spewing up to 40 times the legal limit of nitrogen oxide. 40 times. But nobody knew. The plan worked perfectly. In 2008, the Wolfsburg Titan launched the Jetta TDI clean diesel in America. It was a revelation. Here was a model that got 45 miles per gallon, had tremendous torque, and was supposedly as green as a Prius. The automotive press ate it up. They won Green Car of the Year in 2009. Sales skyrocketed. The brand was finally cracking the code of the American market. And remember that strategy 2018? It was working. By 2015, the group had actually overtaken Toyota to become the largest automaker by sales volume. They were on top of the mountain. The executives in Germany were collecting massive bonuses. Winterkorn was hailed as a genius. But there was a loose thread, and the person who pulled it was not a federal agent or a corporate spy. It was a handful of researchers at a small university in West Virginia who had barely enough budget to buy lunch. This is the part of the story that proves reality is stranger than fiction. In 2013, a non-profit group called the International Council on Clean Transportation, or ICCT, wanted to do a study. Their goal was actually to prove that the fuel was clean. They wanted to show Europe that American standards were working, so they commissioned a test of US-spec German vehicles. They hired the Center for Alternative Fuels, Engines, and Emissions at West Virginia University. It was a tiny team led by a professor named Dan Carter. They lacked a massive lab. They had a portable measurement system, basically a box of sensors they strapped into the trunk of a sedan with a tube running out the tailpipe. They rented a Jetta and a Passat. They avoided placing them on a treadmill. They drove them. They drove from Los Angeles to Seattle, up and down hills, through highway traffic, in the city. And as they drove, the numbers on their laptops started to look wrong. Really wrong. The Jetta was emitting 15 to 35 times the legal limit of NOx. The Passat was 5 to 20 times over. The researchers were confused. They thought their equipment was broken. They recalibrated. They tested again. Same result. They tested a BMW X5 just to check. The BMW passed perfectly. The problem was not the equipment. The problem was the Wolfsburg machines. Now, here is where most companies would panic, but not this corporation. When the researchers published their findings in May 2014, they sent the report to the EPA and to the manufacturer.
The corporation's reaction? They shrugged. They told the regulators it was a technical glitch. They said it was a result of weird driving conditions. They claimed the sensors were wrong. Behind the scenes, however, the emails were flying. Executives in Germany realized the game might be up. According to documents later released by the Department of Justice, engineers admitted to senior management that the defeat device existed. But instead of coming clean, they decided to double down. They initiated a recall in late 2014. They told the EPA they had a software update that would fix the glitch. Owners brought their vehicles in, the software was patched, and they were sent back out. But the fix was a decoy. It failed to remove the cheat. It just tweaked the parameters to make it slightly less obvious. They were still lying to the US government. This arrogance is breathtaking. They truly believed they were too smart to get caught, or perhaps too big to be punished. They spent nearly a year stonewalling the EPA and the California Air Resources Board. But the regulators were getting suspicious. The numbers still failed to add up. The EPA and CARB demanded answers. They threatened to refuse certification for the 2016 models. That would mean the brand could not sell a single TDI unit in America the following year. That was the pressure point. The turning point came in a conference call in August 2015. An engineer, realizing he might be personally liable, broke ranks. He admitted to the regulators that the machines were designed to cheat. But wait, it gets worse. While this legal battle was happening in secret, the company was engaging in some of the most unethical scientific research imaginable to protect their image. In 2014, while they were fighting the EPA, an organization funded by the Wolfsburg Group, BMW, and Daimler commissioned a study to prove exhaust fumes were safe. They conducted this study in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They put 10 cynomolgus macaque monkeys into airtight chambers. They made them watch cartoons to keep them calm. Then, they pumped in waste gases from a beetle. The goal was to show that the monkeys suffered no ill effects. The irony? The beetle they used in the test had the defeat device. So even in their rigged science experiment, they were using a rigged machine. When this story broke years later, highlighted in the Netflix documentary Dirty Money, it destroyed whatever moral high ground the German auto industry had left. It was not just fraud, it was cruelty. Back to September 2015. The EPA had heard enough. On Friday, September 18th, they decided not to wait for a settlement. They went nuclear. They issued a notice of violation. They made it public. They accused the manufacturer of violating the Clean Air Act on nearly 500,000 units in the US. The globe stopped. For the first 24 hours, there was confusion. Was this a mistake? A paperwork error? Then, on Sunday, the firm admitted it. On Monday morning, the markets opened. The stock fell off a cliff. It dropped 20% in one day. The next day, it dropped another 20%. 1/3 of the company's value gone. But the real shock was the scope. It was not just 500,000 units in the US. The conglomerate admitted that the software was installed in 11 million vehicles worldwide. 11 million. That is more inventory than most companies sell in a decade. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Martin Winterkorn, the man who measured panel gaps with a micrometer, claimed he knew nothing. In a video statement, he said, "I am stunned that misconduct on such a scale was possible in the group." A few days later, he resigned.
walking away with a pension pot worth nearly 30 million euros. But he failed to walk away from the law. He was later indicted in the US and Germany. The lawsuits began to pile up like a multi-car crash on the Autobahn. The US Department of Justice sued. The Federal Trade Commission sued. Owners sued. Shareholders sued. The numbers are staggering. The firm agreed to pay a $2.8 billion criminal fine. They paid $1.5 billion in civil penalties. They agreed to buy back 500,000 autos from U.S. owners, costing them over $10 billion. In total, the Dieselgate scandal has cost the organization over $35 billion. That is more than the GDP of many small countries. It is the most expensive corporate scandal in the history of the industry. But the financial cost was just the beginning. The reputational damage was incalculable. The brand had built its identity on trust. Das Auto, the car. They were the sensible, reliable choice. Overnight, they became the poster child for corporate greed and deception. And this is where the story gets interesting for the rest of the market. Because the Wolfsburg giant was not alone. Once the lid was blown off, regulators started testing everyone. And guess what? They found suspiciously high exhaust levels in models from Mercedes-Benz, Renault, Fiat Chrysler, and others. While none had the brazen defeat device code exactly like the Jetta creators, many were exploiting loopholes in the regulations. The German Titan was just the one that took it too far. They failed to merely bend the rules, they programmed a robot to break them. Now, you might be wondering, how did they think they would get away with it? It comes back to that culture we talked about in the beginning. In the investigation that followed, internal documents revealed a complex web of code words and secrecy. Engineers referred to the defeat device as the acoustic function to hide it in emails. But more importantly, it reveals the danger of a corporate culture that refuses to hear no. When Winterkorn set the goal of global domination, he never asked if it was possible. He commanded it. When a leader sets an impossible goal and threatens those who fail, employees have two choices: fail and get fired, or cheat and hope for the best. The engineers chose to cheat. They assumed that because the software was buried deep in millions of lines of code, no one would ever find it. They underestimated the power of a few academics with a sensor in the trunk of a rental. So what happened to the inventory? This is one of the most surreal images of the last decade. The manufacturer had to buy back nearly 350,000 units in the US alone. They could not resell them, and they could not fix them easily. So they parked them. Vast graveyards of automobiles appeared across America. An abandoned football stadium in Detroit, a patch of desert in California near Victorville. Thousands upon thousands of perfectly good-looking Jettas, Golfs, and Beetles sitting in the sun, gathering dust. It was a monument to waste, a physical manifestation of a $30 billion lie. Eventually, most of these units were either fixed with new hardware and sold, or scrapped for parts. But the image of those graveyards remains a haunting symbol of the scandal. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. You would think that a scandal of this magnitude would kill the company. You would think the brand would shrink, wither, and die. That failed to happen. In fact, the scandal might have been the best thing that ever happened to the firm. How is that possible? Before the crisis, the group was lagging in electric vehicles. They were obsessed with TDI technology. They were fighting the future. The scandal forced them to pivot. They had no choice. The old technology was dead. The brand was toxic. The only way to save the company was to go all in on the exact opposite of dirty combustion: electric propulsion. They fired the old guard. They brought in new leadership. They announced a massive investment in electrification, tens of billions of euros. They developed the MEB platform, a modular system for EVs. They launched the ID3 and ID4. Today, the Wolfsburg Group is one of the global leaders in EV production, second only to Tesla in many markets. They are building battery factories, they are building charging networks. In fact, part of their settlement with the US government required them to spend $2 billion building Electrify America, a nationwide charging network. If the scandal hadn't happened, they might still be trying to squeeze the last drops of efficiency out of the combustion engine. They might have missed the electric revolution entirely. The crisis laid bare the rot in the company and forced a painful, expensive, but necessary transformation. However, we should not let them off the hook that easily. The pivot to electric does not erase the damage. Researchers from MIT and Harvard estimated that the excess fumes from those 11 million cheating units would cause approximately 1,200 premature deaths in Europe alone, and dozens in the US. These are not just numbers on a balance sheet. These are people with asthma, heart conditions, and lung disease who suffered because a boardroom in Germany wanted to sell more Passats. And what about the people responsible? While some low-level engineers and mid-level executives went to prison, the very top of the pyramid has largely avoided the inside of a jail cell. Martin Winterkorn was charged with fraud and conspiracy, but his trial has been delayed for years due to his health issues. As of 2024, the man who presided over the biggest fraud in automotive history is still a free man living in Germany. Meanwhile, Rupert Stadler, the former head of Audi, which is owned by the group and was also involved, became the first top-level executive to receive a suspended sentence and a fine. But for many, justice has not been served. So, what is the real lesson here? It is easy to look at the German manufacturer and say, "Don't cheat." But the lesson goes deeper than that. It is about the smartest guys in the room syndrome. We saw it with Enron, we saw it with Theranos, we saw it with FTX. Highly intelligent, well-funded people who believe they can outsmart reality. The executives believed they could outsmart the laws of chemistry. They thought they could code their way around the consequences of burning fossil fuels. They thought that because they were a pillar of the German economy, a global powerhouse, they were untouchable. But there is a detail everyone missed in the rush to condemn the brand. It was not just them. The entire system was complicit. The regulators were asleep at the wheel. The tests were outdated and easy to game. The governments were pushing the fuel as a green solution, incentivizing the very technology that was poisoning their cities. The Wolfsburg team just exploited a system that was already broken. According to a report by the European Federation for Transport and Environment, the gap between official fuel economy figures and real-world performance have been widening for years. This trend was seen across the entire industry. Everyone knew the tests were a joke. The German giant just took the joke too far. Today, the automotive landscape is different. Real driving emissions tests are now mandatory. You cannot just test a vehicle in a lab anymore. You have to drive it on the street with sensors strapped to the back, just like those researchers from West Virginia did. But the ghost of the scandal still haunts the industry. Every time a car company announces a breakthrough, there is lingering skepticism. Is it real, or is it just another line of code? Think about that for a moment. One company, in its quest for dominance, managed to erode the public's trust in an entire sector. And this is exactly what is happening right now with artificial intelligence and big tech. We are seeing companies race to release products, cutting corners on safety, ignoring ethical concerns, all to be number one. We see algorithms that are, quote, black boxes, where even the creators do not fully understand or refuse to disclose how they work. The Wolfsburg engineers hit a defeat device in their engine code. Today, we have to ask, what defeat devices are hidden in the algorithms that run our social media, our banks, and our news feeds? This story is not just about automobiles. It is about what happens when ambition outpaces ethics. It is about the danger of closed systems where no one is allowed to ask questions. In the end, the truth has a funny way of leaking out. Sometimes it is a whistleblower, sometimes it is a hacked email, and sometimes it is just three guys in a rental driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, wondering why the numbers on their laptop fail to make any sense. If you found this deep dive into corporate deception interesting, check out the next video. It explores a company that failed to merely cheat on pollution. They invented a product that did not exist at all. You will not want to miss it.